Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the eTrailer base plate on our 2018 Ford Explorer. Now, there's 5 main components when flat towing your Explorer that are going to be required. Now the first one is going to be the base plate, which is going to attach to the frame of the vehicle, creating a nice structural support for your tow bar to be able to connect from your base plate to the hitch on the RV. Now going along with that, we have our safety chains, and that's it, just in case of an accidental disconnect. It's still going to keep everything attached, and the mounting points are already on the base plate for you. You also have your diode wiring, which is going to transmit light signals from the RV to the tail lights on the towed vehicle, and that's just a 6-pole up front that runs to the 7-pole on the RV. You also have a supplemental braking system, which is going to slow and stop the vehicle as you apply the brakes on the RV. And in case of a catastrophic disconnect where everything failed, you have a breakaway switch, which when pulled, the vehicle will come to a stop. This is what your base plate will look like when it's installed, and it's nice to have some caps here where your arms normally go. You have your safety chain loop, nice and accessible. It also comes with a bracket that's really nice because it allows you to get your 6-pole as well as a breakaway switch mounted up nice and clean in the front. And it does fit pretty well in the grill. You do have to notch some of that out, but overall I think it's a pretty good look when it's not hooked up. And this base plate is going to work with a number of different tow bars because the way that the arms actually attach is onto the tow bar, and it comes with a bunch of different adapters to be able to work with pretty much every brand. So if you already have a tow bar, not to worry, it's going to work with your base plate. And when you are ready to get your tow bar in, you do have some adjustability, not only as it swivels here, but also in the arms. So that's going to allow you to get this lined up. So you want the holes facing vertical with this flat. You'll then slide it into the receiver. And once in place, you'll just simply twist this to where the hole will align. And then you can take your pin, slide that through, and get it clipped down. You can then get your safety chains on, your diode wiring, your breakaway switch, and then the other side. Now with everything hooked up, you're ready to get your vehicle in flat tow mode and hit the road. Now as far as installation goes on this base plate, it was pretty tricky, and I needed to use something like a right angle drill in a few spots, which if you don't have one, it's gonna get pretty tricky. There is a little bit of drilling involved, and overall it was just kind of a not exactly easy base plate to get installed. I've done plenty of them, and this is definitely not the hardest, but it's up there, and the instructions really don't do a great job of laying it out too well, and I think that's kind of part of the problem. Something that I'm not a huge fan of is this adapter style that attaches to the tow bar. It's nice that you can adapt it to whatever tow bar, but you can generally do that when buying a tow bar. You can get the adapters for that to make it work, or you can even get arms that attach to other base plates that'll adapt to your tow bar. So that's really not that great of a feature for me. I think it's a little bit trickier to hook up. I would recommend Roadmaster base plates, especially if you're doing it at home. Roadmaster seems to have really good quality, great instructions when it comes to the base plates, and overall they seem to be the best bang for buck that I've found while installing. To begin an installation, we're going to open up the hood, and where the top portion of our grill meets our radiator core support, there are going to be a series of 10mm screws that we're going to remove. There's a total of 7 of these. You'll find them as you kind of run along here. There's also 2 plastic push pins that you're going to want to pry up. Having a flathead screwdriver or a trim panel tool helps. You're just going to pry on that center. Once you pull that up, you should be able to get underneath the whole thing and get this removed. Now, throughout this whole process, there's going to be quite a bit of hardware that's coming off. You want to make sure you have a nice organized spot. That way, for reinstallation, you'll have all your hardware ready to go. So now we're going to head underneath the fascia. There's going to be a plastic corner here that has 3 8mm bolts that we're going to remove. So the 3 will be located, one here in the front of the fascia, and then the other 2 are kind of in a step spot where you can find those. We're also going to repeat this on the other side. So right where our lower air dam meets kind of our radiator support, there's going to be 3 8mm screws. So you're going to find these here. There's also 3 that are further back. Just make sure you're getting the ones that are closer to these ones with the large washers. going to go to each wheel well, and you'll need a 5.5 socket to get your screws here off. You just kind of work your way up, and you're going to find these going up the inner fender liner. And then at the very top, there's probably going to be a plastic push pin that has a Phillips head on it. So you're going to want to unscrew that with a Phillips head and then pry that off just as you would a normal plastic push pin. There's a total of 7 of the 5.5 screws on each side, so make sure you're getting all of those. And if you need more clearance, you can start the vehicle, turn the wheels all the way to the left if you're working on the passenger side, and vice versa for the other. I'm lucky enough to have a small socket to be able to get these, but if not, you can always turn the wheel for more clearance. Now, as far as the instruction goes, if you're following along with those as well as this video, they say to pull off the inner fender. So that you do have to pull off this trim here to gain access to pull that off. So just if you pry up on this, there's just some plastic clips. Just kind of take your time here. You don't want to bend the plastic because it can leave creases in it. But as you kind of work up, we do need to separate it up to where the fascia meets the front fender. So pushing back our liner, I'm going to reach up, and there's going to be 3 10mm screws. You can feel the heads of them. They're facing this way, so it is kind of tricky to gain access to these. But we'll go ahead. I'm going to probably take my extension off and see if I can't get those loosened up and taken out. There's also a plastic clip up there that you can feel with your fingers. If you just push on the tab, that should allow that to kind of drop out. Once I kind of get it off, I'll be able to show you exactly where it's at. So we were unsuccessful with our previous tool. I think the best thing to get to these is going to be a swivel head ratchet wrench 10. Now these do have thread lock on them from the factory, so you're going to have to kind of fight at them to kind of knock them loose, and they did kind of fight me throughout the entire time. But just take your time to get those 3 10mm taken out. And then I mentioned that plastic clip. I'll show you how to kind of get that popped out once I get my 10 mils out. So this is what they look like when they come out. You can see the thread lock on there, and there's quite a bit of thread. So you're going to be working at it for a little bit, but once you get all 3 taken out on each side, then we'll be able to get the fascia slowly pulled off. Now the plastic tab is about midway in the center here. So if you push on the center part and just put a little bit of pressure downward on the fascia, it does have to pull straight down. That's going to allow you to get this undone. The tab is kind of tricky here, but get this pushed in while pulling. There we go. So here you can see the location of those, and this is that plastic tab that I just push in while pulling. They have these alignment tabs here, so you want to make sure that those are going straight down. Now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab some painter's tape and run this along the edge. That way, when we do finally pull off the fascia, if it rubs against any of these edges, it's not going to scratch our clear coat. So now at this point, I'm going to grab an extra set of hands. I have Tom here helping me pull the fascia off. And the best way, once these are popped down, just kind of work your way along the bumper. You can see that this pops off pretty easily, but don't pull away too far because we have some electrical connections. So on the driver's side, there's this large clip. You're just going to push this tab in. Sometimes this comes off the plastic clip if you need a little bit more leverage. There we go. Now also on the passenger side, we have our washer fluid line. This goes to the front camera where there's a squirter. To get this to separate, instead of peeling here on the T, you're better off generally to pull off these retaining clips off the white plastic. And what I found is once you kind of separate it, that's going to be dripping out. Just take this line for now that was on the T, and then you can put this in place so it stops leaking and put that retainer clip back in. Now when we obviously put everything back together, we'll be hooking it back to that T, but for now, this is going to keep that from leaking. Now we can set our fascia aside somewhere safe that it's not going to get scratched. So now we need to get our impact bar removed, and the first thing we're going to do with that is there's going to be 4 13mm bolts on each side, so go ahead and get those taken out. Now, there are some small little tack welds. It does look like right about this area that you can drill out. I might be able to get this with just a flathead screwdriver. It's a pretty small tack weld. So if we can kind of pry this to get that weld knocked loose, that's going to be great. If not, we may have to end up drilling it. I'm going to try a pry bar here with a hammer. So the pry bar wasn't really working too great, so we do have these 3 tack welds, it looks like. I'm going to just take a small drill bit, drill right through the center of each of them, and that should help loosen this up. Now, I ended up using an air chisel, and it did still take quite a bit to get this to separate. I would suggest getting maybe a cutting wheel and notching out just this little portion. Make sure you're not cutting too far because we are going to be rebolting this back up later, so we want to make sure that we have all of our mounting spots still safe. So it may be a little bit tricky here. It's just small tack welds, but it is pretty strong. So whatever method you find to kind of get this portion taken out or knocked loose, go ahead and do that. At this point, we're going to go ahead and repeat on the other side. So the air chisel worked right through this. I was able to get this to separate a lot easier. So if you have that available, that's going to be the best ticket. Just kind of sit in the seam and work it down until you get that to separate. Now we can carefully slide out our impact bar here and set this aside for later reinstallation. Now we need to get our washer reservoir loosened up. That's going to give us access to be able to get our base plate up. So with an 11mm socket, we're going to go ahead and get this and then this back one loosened up, and then there's also an 8mm. You are going to need a deep well socket to be able to get over those studs. So go ahead and get this all removed. So now we need to trim our shutter here. We have this air dam that kind of goes around it as a shroud. You're going to follow this line, and then just once you get down here, you can kind of see where this flexible part starts to kind of go into the darker plastic. So I'm going to follow that along and make my way over here. Just be careful not to hit any of your shutters while trimming. So as far as trimming goes, this rubber, you can use a pair of snips to kind of get through that. When it gets to the plastic, if you have a Dremel, or I use a multi-tool that works really well, that's going to be generally your best bet. Now at this point, they want you to clamp the base plate up to the frame. You're going to align the hole on the front with the hole that's already pre-existing here in the frame rail, and that's going to give us the template to be able to drill out the back. So if you don't have a clamp like this to clamp on both sides, I found a way that I think maybe actually works better. Now, in the instruction manuals, the pictures they have show the bolts going in a different orientation than what's actually in the exploded view of the parts. But I think to make this a little bit better on ourselves, what we'll do is we're going to take our large bolt that we have, our large split washer, and then our flat washer, and we're going to just drop this down through here. We're going to do that on the other side as well. Now you might want an extra set of hands here. I have Jake helping me, and what we're going to do is slide this in place and try to get this to align. And once we have that there, just get your nut ready and hand tighten that in place so that way it's going to hold up your base plate. It might get a little bit tricky as that bolt's trying to spin on me here. Now before you snug that down, you may have some wire loom that's going to get in the way. We want to make sure that doesn't get pinched, so if you need to, you can go ahead and move that. And then I'm going to just go ahead and snug this down, and that's going to draw up our base plate. But before we do that, double check, make sure it's aligned properly. There's a little bit of side-to-side movement, so we're really just making sure that it's nice and even. And also, if your washer fluid bottle's in the way, I took the hardware off. I just kind of loosened that up off the studs to give us that wiggle room. So with this kind of loosely in place, make sure, again, it's centered up. It's also a good time to check any clearances. This flap kind of flaps in here, and that's fine. But anywhere where you cut, if it's tight against there, that's a good chance to mark where you need to trim that off. We are going to be taking this down. And something else is, I mentioned that there's 2 different ways that the instructions kind of show this. I do believe that the bolt going straight up is going to be the best option, mostly because the way that the flat washer sits inside of this frame rail, I'm not super happy with that. So I think if we flip it, it's going to be a better option. But I have this aligned up enough, and I've cinched it up far enough to where I know at least where to drill. We're going to be using a 1/2-inch drill bit to drill through the frame to create another mounting point for the back. So what I'll do is take a paint marker and just make a nice circle of where we need to drill, and you can go ahead and do that on both sides. So here's a little issue I see with this base plate. You do have to drill this out, but unless you have a right angle drill or a very long 1/2-inch drill bit, which are going to be going in an angle, it's going to be really tough to drill this out. Here on the driver's side, just make sure that wire loom's out of the way. And what I'm doing is I have a smaller, stubbier bit with a right angle drill, which if you don't have it, it's going to be a little bit tricky here, I will admit that. And I'm going to just make my hole first and then come back with a step bit and then enlarge it large enough to get our bolt placed through. I recommend with this bolt, as you enlarge this, just check to make sure that there's clearance for this bolt to pass through. So I'm going to keep going until we can get this fed through our newly drilled hole. Now, since we have raw exposed metal from drilling, we want to make sure that it doesn't turn to rust long term if water sits there. So just a little bit of spray paint, just go ahead and coat wherever there's raw metal from that drilling. So now we need to get our hardware prepped. So we had our larger bolts that kind of held up our base plate. I'm going to go ahead and get some thread lock placed on here. And then our back bolts, the one that I used to gauge that what we drilled out, we're going to go ahead and get this in the same orientation as far as your split washer and your flat washer. I'll go ahead and get some thread lock on there as well. And you're going to want those handy and an extra set of hands, because as we feed this up, we're going to try to get these threaded and started. So we can actually start with our, it might make sense to do our rear ones first. It'll be a little bit easier to get that started, or the front one, it's up to you. Main thing is we just need to get this back up in place. So I have Rick here helping me now, and we're going to go ahead and get this line back up and do this larger one first. So I'm going to slide this up, and while kind of holding it there, take your nut and get that started. Again, just enough to where this supports it. So just a couple threads should be enough. So again, double check your wire loom is not pinched, and then we'll put some thread lock on our smaller bolts. And then we'll get that hand threaded in place as well. Now, in the instructions, the next step is to get a brace mounted up, and it's going to bolt up to the base plate, and then we'll be drilling here. And then they say to tighten down all of the base plate bolts. I think it's a better option if we get these tightened down. That way this is cinched up, and that way when we're drilling the hole, we're not, binding it up as this pulls up as we tighten those. So I'm going to get these all tightened down and then follow the torque setting in the instruction manual to get these torqued down properly. So I'm going to start with the back bolt. This is going to be a 3/4 inch socket. Now the instruction manual does have the torque setting for this one. Our larger bolts, they actually don't have a torque setting for this. If I was to guess, I would say probably somewhere over 100 would be probably good. We do have that thread lock on there. We just want it as snug as possible. And we do want to try to tighten it on the nut side. Generally that's going to give you a much better torque on it. So if you can, just feed this through with a short socket and get these torqued down properly. Now you are going to need a wrench on that bottom side to get the torque, and our front ones are going to be a 15/16, so you can go ahead and get that torque down as well. So now we can get our side bracket installed. Now as far as thread lock that's included in the kit, I already ran out, so use it sparingly or have some extra on hand. We'll be getting our split washer and a flat washer on our bolt, and then I'm just going to kind of get this fed through here, and then on the back side, grab your nut and just hand tighten that in, and then we'll repeat for that bottom hole as well. And they say to use a clamp or adjust out the slop, I think, in the instruction manual. Not really sure what they're going for there. This does have a decent amount of play here. So I think the best option that I'm going to do, just for uniformity's sake, is try to match it up. There's a hole that's already here where the body mount attaches to the frame of the vehicle. So I'm going to try to get this pretty well aligned with that, and that way I can use that as a reference for the other side. But we'll go ahead and get this tightened down. This is going to be a 9/16 socket and wrench to get this accomplished. So now with this tightened down, it's going to give us the template to take our 1/2 inch drill bit and run it through that part of the frame. So go ahead and get that drilled out. And And just as we did where we drilled out previous, I'm going to just put a little bit of spray paint on that raw edge just to kind of protect that. Once that's dry, you're going to go ahead with your serrated flange bolt and pass that through. And then we're going to finish it up with a nylon lock nut. So go ahead, get that threaded on. And generally with your nylon nuts, you don't have to use a thread locker on here. But if you want to, you can put some for a little added peace of mind. Looking at our brace on our passenger side, I tried to align this here with the same hole so it was even and uniform on both sides. There's going to be a clearance issue with this bottom stud for our washer bottle. They do include, I guess you could call it spacers to space this out, but even just kind of mocking this up, no matter which way I move this, there's not a whole lot of wiggle room, but I really wasn't able to get this to line up. The bottle's going to hit along this curved edge. So again, I'm just going to kind of keep it uniform and line it up with this hole. Now we can go ahead and get our hardware torqued down. We'll be using a 9/16 for these smaller ones, and then we'll be using a 3/4 for our back ones. Now at this point, we're going to take our safety cables and you're going to want to loop it around the base plate and then a structural part of the frame of the vehicle, making sure you're not making contact with any belts or anything moving. There's really no perfect way to figure out exactly where you want it. You just want to make sure, again, structurally it's going to be sound. So I looped mine through the hole here on our frame and then I've wrapped it around our base plate. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to try to get this clamped down with our quick links. And we'll go ahead and do this to the other side as well. And if we need to, we can zip tie some of this up. That way it's not dangling around. Now we got to get a washer bottle put back in place, and there's 2 extra nylon lock nuts here that I'll be putting on the studs just to kind of create a gap or a spacer there. So go ahead and do that, and then you can get your hardware put back in place to get this tightened down. And those loosely just kind of go over the threads. They don't thread on there. They're just used as that spacer. So those are going to create that gap for us to account for our new bracket. And our 8mm just barely gets a few threads on there. So go ahead and get this all tightened down. Now for the bolt that goes through on this top portion on our washer bottle, they give you this long bolt that threads through there, but it does bottom out on the frame before you can really even tighten it. So to keep that from moving around, I am going to use the factory bolt. You're not going to have a ton of threads on there to hold it, so I am going to throw some thread locker on there just to make sure that it stays in for the lifespan of the vehicle. And then we're just going to snug this down. We want to make sure it's not putting too much pressure, so just check all of your spots to make sure that you know, we don't have any bolts or that bracket pushing too hard against the washer bottle. I think just slightly snug like that, everything's in place. Now we'll get our bumper beam slid back in and bolted up. Now at this point, your base plate is officially installed, and if you're doing the rest of your flat toe components, which I highly suggest doing now, you're going to want to leave that fascia off because a lot of your stuff is going to mount up front. And they do include a bracket. I'm going to wait to get mine mounted up, but you're going to be able to utilize your base plate to run some of your cables up for your braking system as well as your diodes. So we'll come back a little bit later once we have everything installed, and I'll show you how to trim up and get your fascia put back on. And just kind of aligning the top tabs here, you know, to kind of get it all centered up. Just kind of putting this here. You can loosely put some hardware in if you want to hold that in place, but this pretty much gives us an idea of where we're cutting out. Now granted, it's not pulled back all the way, so it will kind of draw in a little bit, but you can start to see where we're going to need to trim out on both sides. So I always take a chalk marker or a paint marker and just kind of mark it out. That way you can get a reference point, and then you can go back, take the fascia off, trim it, and then mock it back up just to make sure you get that nice clean fit. And once you have everything working properly, fascia should slide back on, and then we'll just attach everything in the reverse order that we took it off. Make sure you get your wiper or your windshield washer squirter put back in, as well as that plug that we unplugged from the bumper. So I've gone ahead and got everything put back together in the reverse order, and this is kind of how it's going to look. So when I trimmed it out, I tried my best to leave as much grill as possible, but it really didn't work out just with the way that the components are mounted here. But this entire top here can stay. I did just kind of cut out this section for our arms and safety chain loops, and again, just here because of our bracket, I wanted it nice and open and able to be used easily. So overall, pretty clean look. It keeps everything pretty tidy up front. But overall, once you get everything back, you're ready to hook your vehicle up, get all your components set up, and hit the road. And that was a look and installation of the eTrailer base plate on a 2018 Ford Explorer.